Welcome to Unadulterated Adultery Confessions. It all started on a warm summer morning in Virginia. The air was sticky with heat, and I could feel my scarf clinging to my neck as I stood outside the modest brick house. This was my first job in America, far from the dusty streets of Balka where I grew up. Back home, I'd never imagined leaving my family or my small world, but life had a way of surprising us. The Jacobs, a seemingly perfect family of 4, needed a nanny, and I needed the money. It wasn't just about the paycheck, it was about proving to my parents and stay true to yourself. I had always prided myself on my self-control, my ability to resist the temptation heavy and dangerous. I froze, unsure of how to respond. "Aliyah," I began, but he interrupted me. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, "I shouldn't have said that." "No, it's okay," I said, even though it wasn't. We stood there in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on us. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't easy to love, and that I was complicated and flawed and bound by rules he could never understand. But instead, I said nothing. The days passed in a blur. I tried to convince myself that nothing had changed, but deep down I knew it had. Zach's presence was everywhere. His laughter echoed through the house, his scent lingered in the air, and his voice replayed in my mind long after he was gone. I began to notice the little things about him. The way his eyes wrinkled when he smiled, the way he hummed under his breath while doing dishes, the way he always made sure the kids said, "Thank you and please." He wasn't just kind, he was thoughtful in a way that felt rare and precious. One afternoon, as I was pushing Splendor on the swing in the backyard, Zach came out with a tray of iced tea. "Thought you might need a break," he said, handing me a glass. "Thank you," I said, taking it gratefully. We sat on the porch steps, watching the children play. "Do you ever think about what your life could have been?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you'd stayed in Balka, if you hadn't come here." I knew I was doing the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. That night, I prayed harder than I ever had before. I prayed for strength, for guidance, for the courage to stay true to myself. And as I knelt on the floor, tears streaming down my face, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting temptation. I was fighting a part of myself I didn't recognize. The days after our conversation in the laundry room were tense but manageable. Zach kept his promise to give me space, and I did everything I could to refocus on my job. I threw myself into taking care of Splendor and Emmanuel, planning crafts and baking projects that kept us all busy from morning until bedtime. But even as I kept my hands occupied, my mind wandered to him. Zach stayed cordial, almost distant, and I convinced myself that this was the best way forward. We could pretend nothing had happened, that the words we'd shared in the laundry room were just a moment of weakness. For a while, it almost worked. Then came the storm. It was a Friday evening, just after sunset, when the rain began. The thunder rolled in first, shaking the windows and startling Emmanuel, who clung to my leg as I cleaned up the dinner table. "Don't worry, Emmanuel," I said, scooping him up. "It's just a little noise. Let me get you ready for bed, okay?" I carried him upstairs, reading his favorite bedtime story while the rain poured outside. By the time both kids were asleep, the storm had grown stronger. The wind howled, and the house felt eerily quiet despite the chaos outside. I headed downstairs, expecting to find Zach in his usual spot on the couch. Instead, I found him in the kitchen, staring out the window with a glass of wine in his hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and the soft glow of the kitchen light highlighted the sharp lines of his jaw. He looked deep in thought, and I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt. "You don't drink wine, do you?" he asked without turning around, as if sensing my presence. "No," I replied, stepping into the room. "It's against my faith." He nodded, finally turning to face me. "I figured as much. You're different. Is that a bad thing?" I asked, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Not at all," he said, his voice soft. "It's refreshing." I busied myself by wiping down the counters, trying to ignore the way his words made my heart race. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel his eyes on me as I worked. "Aliyah," he said after a long silence. "Yes," I replied, not looking up. "Can we talk?" I stopped wiping and turned to face him. "About what?" "About us," he said, his voice low. I shook my head, my pulse quickening. "There is no us, Zach." "Then why can't I stop thinking about you?" he asked, stepping closer. "Zach, please," I began, but he interrupted me. "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice trembling. "I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't help it. I see you every day, taking care of my kids, making this house feel like a home, and I—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I've never met anyone like you." My breath caught in my throat. His words were everything I tried to ignore, everything I told myself I didn't want to hear. But hearing them now, spoken aloud, made it impossible to deny what was happening between us. "Zach," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "you're married. You have a family." "I know," he said, his eyes filled with pain. "But Brianna is always gone, always busy, and when she's here, it's like we're strangers. You're the only one who makes me feel." He stopped again, as if the words were too difficult to say. I stood frozen, torn between the part of me that knew this was wrong and the part of me that longed to feel wanted, cherished, and seen. "Zach," I whispered, but it wasn't a plea for him to stop. It was something else entirely, a surrender. He closed the distance. place casting shadows on the walls as we lost ourselves in each other. It was raw, unrestrained, and completely consuming. The next morning, I woke up in his arms, the events of the night before replaying in my mind. I should have felt ashamed, but all I felt was a strange sense of contentment. For the first time in a long The house that had been both my refuge and my prison faded into the distance as the car pulled away. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I had to find myself again. I had to reconnect with the faith and the values I'd abandoned. And I had to forgive myself for everything. That night, in the small apartment I rented across town, I knelt on the floor and prayed for the first time in months. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't perfect, and I'd made mistakes. But I was ready to start over. Hey everyone, if you found this story gripping and want to hear more like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories every week. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have your own wild stories to share or ideas you'd like us to bring to life, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching.